From our 22 News Broadcast Center, this is 22 News in Focus.
Good Sunday afternoon. Welcome to 22 News in Focus. I'm Kate Walsh. American history has been made this week, and the world is still trying to figure out what a Donald Trump presidency will look like. In Western Massachusetts, we also had some contested races for the state legislature and 4 statewide ballot questions. So today on 22 News in Focus, we're going to get expert analysis of what the presidential and local races mean for you from the pundits and politicians themselves. So we have many guests on the program today and a lot of topics to cover. Joining me first is political consultant Tony Signoli and Tim Versalati, professor of political science and the director of the Western New England University Polling Institute. Thank you both for being here. I have a lot of questions for you both. First of all, this past week, Donald Trump was elected president. A lot of people didn't see that coming. It's been called a big upset. Why is it being called an upset?
Well, if you look at the pre-election polling, most of the national polls, not all, but most had Hillary Clinton ahead. But the final pre-election polls, it was all within the margin of error. So the real upset comes not at the national level, but at the state level, where there were particular states where he was not expected to contest, let alone win. And so that's where the surprise came.
Now, you're an expert on polling. You do it all the time. Why did we see Hillary Clinton with leads a month, weeks before the election? What was behind that? A lot of people are saying that, at least we're hearing from, that some Trump supporters might not have wanted to admit they were voting for Trump. Is there any truth to that?
It's difficult to prove empirically. The shy Trump voter, sort of the equivalent of the British shy Tory voter, but one other factor beyond that Trump supporters may have been hesitant to complete telephone surveys or online surveys were simply the assumptions that pollsters made about their likely voter pool. Would it look as white? Would it look as working class as the electorate turned out to be? They may have made some assumptions, they may have made some decisions that really did not anticipate the turnout of working class white voters.
And on top of that, the Clinton campaign was relying on Hispanic and black voters. Did we see them turn out in the numbers that they expected them to?
No. And what's intriguing about that is I remember doing this show with you about a year ago, and there was this thought that it was coming out at that time that she would have all these votes. It would be natural. And I remember saying to you at that time, for Hillary Clinton, it's not enough just to get a majority of those votes. She needs them all. To see the Hispanic Latino population, 29% vote for Donald Trump, that was shell-shocking to just everyone that looked at this and that has looked at this so far. Even in that same regard, too, for the African-American community not to have produced a vote close to what Barack Obama got, that was another major problem. For you look at how close this election is in state by state, as Tim said, and you can see where those differences were there. There was an assumption that these demographics were going to be with Hillary Clinton. You can't assume in politics. You've got to know for sure.
Why is it that the black and Hispanic vote didn't turn out like they were expected to?
You know, I don't think it was a racial thing. I don't think it was an ethnic thing. I think it was something else. I think it was the same reason that a lot of other groups did not turn out in the numbers that Hillary Clinton needed. You know, whatever anyone may think of her, so well qualified, not qualified, whatever, she just was not as well liked as a Barack Obama. There was an excitement factor that was clearly missing here. And you saw it in a lot of these states. And even to your original question on this, on polling on what was missed, at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, I had a chance to see 11 of the battleground states from the Clinton side of this, the perspective of the Democrats, because they were actually sending out, here's how it looks. We're up by 3 here, we're up by 5 there, we're up by 2. And I thought to myself, wow, that's amazing. These are all the swing states. And it actually indicated at that point that she could lose 1 or 2 of those and would still be okay, and that she wouldn't need to win Michigan. And yet, within a 4-hour period, from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., that just disintegrated. It was stunning to see that happened. And I think there were a lot of folks that showed up, it looks like, at the end of the working day, who in some places just defied the polls, defied the media. A lot of these people probably thought they were going and voting at the end of the day and throwing their vote away. And yet they showed up and they voted for Donald Trump.
And we also heard from pundits yesterday, you know, covering the election results. They were saying that Hillary Clinton was having people actually bring voters to the polls, get them out and vote. Trump, not so much, but people were still excited enough to vote for Trump. Is that something that we've seen in the past? That confidence that Trump had worked for him, but maybe an overconfidence of Clinton didn't?
I think there is some truth to that. The assumption was that the Clinton ground game would add 1, 2, 3 percentage points to her pre-election polling totals. But what people didn't anticipate was the enthusiasm driven by anger, by frustration, that drove Trump supporters, white, less educated Trump supporters, to the polls as well.
Let's talk about Massachusetts. We kind of had a split state with Clinton and Trump. Of course, Clinton won Massachusetts, but if you look at the demographics, you see Western Massachusetts Hamden County had a decent amount of Trump supporters, and then Central Massachusetts, Trump, but then of course Clinton took the state. Is that something that we haven't seen before with Democrats and Republicans, or is it pretty standard?
I think you're starting to see that change. In the 508, we've actually been watching it for the last decade. It's much more conservative. It's an area that voted for a Scott Brown over an Elizabeth Warren. And in Western Massachusetts, you know, it's really almost cherry picking, community by community, as to how that community is going to go. There's no standard that because it's Massachusetts, it's going to be a Democratic vote. We always have to bear in mind that in Massachusetts, the major party is the independent, unenrolled party, folks that don't identify as D or as R. And if you take a look at some of the races, in fact, some of the legislators you'll be talking to today, look at their results. They defied in their own Senate districts how national voting went. You had folks that voted for Donald Trump, but then voted for Eric Lesser in his district. And you see that throughout Western Mass. That's the other thing, too. In Western Massachusetts, there's a little bit of a parochialism, too. We don't look at it as D or R. We look at it as, you know, after their name, Western Massachusetts. Republican or Democrat, we get the drift that they're fighting a lot of Boston interests for us out here.
And were you able to do a lot of polling in Massachusetts when it came to the presidential race?
Yeah, and some of the patterns seem to fit previous cycles, in the sense that our final pre-election poll had Hillary up by 30 points. She won by 28. The margin of victory in the last 4 cycles has been between 22 and 26 points. So at the presidential level, although the distributions may have varied somewhat by region, the totals looked fairly consistent with what we've seen in the past.
And with so many pollsters calling it wrong nationally and statewide, I've got to do Tim is being modest. Western New England University called it right on the questions in Massachusetts, on question 2 and on question 4, where so many others got it wrong, including some of the big names out of Boston. So very well done.
Well, thank you very much.
Congratulations on that. And we'll be talking about the ballot questions in a second. First, I want to get back to the presidential race. We were seeing battleground states. I remember Georgia was talked about a lot. And they're saying these are fairly new battleground states. Why is the country changing that way?
Everything is changing. Anything we thought about elective politics, all these concepts of data mining and you know, on the ground, voter ID, get out the vote, it all changed. You had Donald Trump, one guy, a one-person show, beat all these surrogates for Hillary Clinton, and literally not just change the map yesterday as to what the battleground states were, but what a great thought that you just brought up. I mean, Georgia, this was not in play to be a state that would have been a decision maker. You take a look at the board. You know, certainly by a few 100,000 votes, I think it's 188,000 votes, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. But then take a look at the board of these states that hadn't been in play before, you know, and all of a sudden they were. Donald Trump and this amazing phenomena that he has changed all of this in a great way. No longer will the standard dictums about what does or does not work in a presidential campaign, you know, be able to be applied in the future. It's all changed with this race.
And there are some demographic changes as well over the long term. Maybe not this cycle or the next cycle, but we are seeing, with the growth of the Latino population and the significant African American population in Georgia, that someday that may be in play. Texas may eventually move from red to purple. Arizona took a while to call on election night, again because of the strong support among the Latino voters out there. So add that to Trump's success in the industrial Midwest, and the map is very fluid, very much in flux right now.
So it's keeping the future presidential candidates on their toes a lot more. They can't just focus on the typical battleground states. They really have to focus everywhere, because you might not know when the next battleground state would pop up, right?
That's right. You have to be a visionary about this and anticipate all kinds of scenarios.
Interesting. I do want to talk about the ballot questions, but I have another question. A lot of people have been saying, Gary Johnson, you know, they always say about a third-party candidate takes away the votes from the two major candidates. Would you say that happened this time around in any states? Gary Johnson being in the mix, taking votes away from, let's say, Hillary Clinton, and that's why she didn't win?
You can't blame it entirely on a Gary Johnson or on Jill Stein. You know, you get the game you get. You've got to go out and you've got to bear in mind that you're going to have to deal with a loss or siphoning off of some of those votes. It's even when people said, oh my God, the Comey issue, for an example. The Clinton folks anticipated some kind of an October surprise. It just turned out to be that rather than something else. You anticipate these things. But what a shame it is that when a race like Johnson's is brought forth and it takes that many people away from the main game. You know, often, you know, perhaps it's a biased kind of a perspective from someone who's on the professional side of all this. We look at this and we say, my gosh, there was no opportunity for this fellow to win, and yet to run impacted the presidential race, perhaps one way or the other. And Jill Stein in the same way.
Okay, now I want to talk about the ballot questions. You did a lot of research on these, and it seemed going into the election day that question 2, based on the polls, was going to end up the way it did, with it not being passed. What did you see leading up, you know, the months before Election Day when it had to do with charter schools? Were people just really against expanding them?
The evolution of public opinion on that issue was fascinating. We began polling on it in April, and at that point in time, people didn't know a whole lot about charter schools. If they didn't have a family member who attended, there was a lot of uncertainty, and at that point in time, question 2 was passing by a significant margin, but with a big unknown. More than 20% of respondents couldn't offer an opinion. Boy, did that change over the summer with the advertising and the direct mail and the media focus, so that by September, the numbers had flipped. It was lagging in double digits. Still a decent number of don't knows, though, people who had not been directly affected by it or thought they weren't, who didn't sit down to think it through. But by the time we got to the period right before the election, it was baked in. A double-digit loss for question 2. The don't knows had diminished. The percentage of people following the issue very or somewhat closely, more than 80%. All that money spent on ads and direct mail, it reached people. It just didn't necessarily sway them away from the attitudes we saw earlier in the fall.
And Tony, really quickly, recreational marijuana.
Yeah, the real deal, yeah.
That passed. Was that a surprise?
I'm not really sure you can say it was a surprise. It had been consistent from what we had seen in polling that the electorate was ready to say yes to this. And if you took a look at where those votes came in, Greater Boston, the Berkshires, etc., and the age groups of folks that voted, you know, it wasn't the kids that voted this one in. It was 65 and over. It was 55 and over even and whatnot. But when you take a look at the amount of money that was spent on this, there was a thought, you know, it did tighten up a little bit at the end, but there was a thought that it might have been just a little bit closer. And if you look at the great coalition of folks that came out against it, a popular governor, Charlie Baker, a popular and powerful attorney general, Maura Healey, every sheriff in Massachusetts, every district attorney coming out against it, the popular mayor of Boston, you would have thought it would have been a difficult success for the proponents to be able to pull this off. But it's just one of those things where people in their hearts, in their minds, you know, this is something that they wanted, and it defied all the politics that have been put in by the opponents.
Seems like that was the theme of this election year.
Surprises everywhere, yes.
Thank you both so much for being here. We really appreciate your input. And we'll be talking to state senators and representatives just after this break. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about the results of Tuesday's election, and joining me now are Jose Tosado, State Representative for the 9th Hamden District, and Brian Ash, Representative for the 2nd Hamden District. First, I'd like to congratulate both of you on winning your election this year. Exciting.
Thank you, Kate.
Probably a relief as well.
Very much. Always. I'm glad it's Sunday, not Tuesday.
Yeah. So first of all, how has the makeup of the State House changed because of this election?
I don't think it's really changed very much in regards to the number of Republicans and the number of Democrats in the House. I believe pretty much there might have been one more additional Republican. I think it was someone from Cape Cod turned that seat over from a Democrat to a Republican. But other than that, it's been pretty much a status quo coming in January.
Yeah, we've stayed pretty consistent over the years, the makeup of the House and the Senate.
Are there a lot of new faces you'll be seeing? A lot of people that maybe didn't run again? Or?
There's a few, but not as many as we've had in the past. There's been, in my second term, we had a huge turnover, 25% of the House turned over, but this was relatively small, not as many contested races around the Commonwealth.
So what does that mean now that the election is over? You go back to the State House, relieved, welcome back everyone, shaking hands. What's next? Do you go right to business, or do you have to wait until they're...
Well, after we get sworn in January 4th, then it's back to business. And you meet the new legislators, the new House members, new senators, and then the Speaker comes out with his agenda, and we get going for the new session.
And what about from now until you get sworn in for your new term in January?
Well, the fact that we have not been in formal sessions doesn't mean that our work has stopped, that we've been taking the summer off. Actually, we've all been very hard working out in our districts with our doing constituent services, which I really think is the backbone of this job. So we'll continue to do that over the course of the next couple of months. Come January, after the swearing-in ceremonies, I suspect that things will get very hectic. It's a time where we file a large number of bills and advocate for passage and to get people to come on board with it. So the leadership, I believe, is probably staying the same in the House, and so I think that's helpful because the same people who were there will be there now, and it hopefully will make things a lot easier. As Brian said, there probably aren't going to be too many changes. I believe in Western Massachusetts, there's one new representative coming in from the 11th Hampton District.
I believe, senator as well.
And a new senator?
Berkshire.
So, oh, that's right. After Senator
Yes.
Downing left. Exactly. But other than that, I think it's the same faces from Western Mass, and probably the same faces from throughout the Commonwealth. And
which is good to have a little consistency along the way as well, so we can continue moving forward without taking a little step back before we have to.
Well, that was my next question. Is it kind of frustrating to have to run for re-election every 2 years?
It is. Could you do something about
Yes.
that, Kate?
Can you get to work on it?
It is, but it's part,
it's
part of the political process, and you know going in ahead of time that every 2 years you may or may not have a contested race, and it's part of it. But it gets difficult at times because the House or the Senate can change. It's always moving parts, so sometimes you take a couple steps forward, you have to take a step backwards because you have new members coming in, but it's always been that way, so you know what you're doing when you come into it.
Right. So in this not break time, because you are busy locally, what are you doing, really? You're going out into the community. I'm sure you're finding out issues that are important to your constituents so you can go back and propose bills, but what are those things that you're doing?
Well, as Jose mentioned before, the biggest part of our job is constituent services. Every day our offices get calls, as the senators' offices do well, about just constituent issues that people have without your district. So you're constantly doing those, and as Jose mentioned, that's the backbone of our job. And then you start preparing what your agenda is for the upcoming session, bills you want to file, bills you want to refile, because a lot of times you file legislation, it doesn't pass right away. Sometimes it takes multiple sessions to get it through. So you start getting your priorities in order, and then you meet with the Speaker, and you want to make sure that you're on the same page or he knows your priorities, then you get geared up for the new session coming in.
And could you describe what you're doing specifically, both of you?
That's pretty specific, actually. I mean, that's what we do.
Like real things that
I actually have an office in Springfield, a district office. People walk in there all the time, and sometimes it's very concrete stuff. Like, for example, a person who needed a transponder who didn't know exactly where to go yet. This major change has just happened in terms of the way we go up and down the turnpike. So even something as we may think it's minor, is really very important to an individual. Things like navigating the bureaucracies. I mean, I have a number of people who actually come into my office because they're trying to get a hold of the registry office. They're trying to get a hold of some human service organization, but for some reason, as an average citizen, they have difficulties in accessing those kinds of services. Our office, making a phone call from our office is very helpful, opens up doors for people. That's very, very concrete. Other than that, in terms of, as Brian said, people come up to you with ideas about needs, which generate thoughts for new legislation. But what we need to do before that is obviously is do our homework, do our research, see what other states are doing relative to these particular issues. So our staff, our aides, and it's not a lot of staff, it's one person, basically, for us anyways, And that's what they're doing. They're doing research to inform our decisions as we move forward in terms of identifying legislation that's going to benefit our district, our Commonwealth, and our city.
And as Jose mentioned, every day it's completely different. The calls you get, the issues that people are dealing with. Somebody might call, they need a handicap plate for their car. The transponder was a big issue, and we had sessions where we'd have transponders available, and people could come there, they could fill out the paperwork and get them ready. So every day there's something completely different, as well as preparing for what you do at the State House and the legislation. It's almost like two separate jobs. Your district job, where you take care of, and our districts are completely different. I have 4 towns, Jose has Springfield, so we have a lot of different issues every day that happen, and that alone can keep you busy, but then you get prepared to go back to the State House and file legislation and get behind and support other pieces of legislation.
All right, and before the political consultants were talking about how here in Massachusetts, voters might not focus as much on the Republican and Democrat side of things when they're electing state leaders. But did the presidential election this year with Donald Trump winning, is that going to affect you all at the State House?
No, I don't think so. I mean, well, it depends, I guess, what he does down the road, but just him being elected won't really have an impact on our day-to-day jobs. I mean, we're focused with the Commonwealth and more specifically our individual districts. So that alone, I don't think will really have an impact. What he does, in his first 100 days after he gets elected may or may not have a major impact.
And at your level at the State House, do you find that Republicans and Democrats are working well together, or is it kind of like the country where in Congress there's a huge divide?
I think we're much better off in the Commonwealth here than you are nationally. And, there's always, it's like any business, you don't get along with everybody, but for the most part, the Democrats and Republicans try to work together and get things accomplished for their
Exactly, and that's so much true even within Western Mass. The Western Mass delegation, whether there's a D or an R after your name, it doesn't matter. We represent a region, and we all work together to make sure that we get the resources that we need for Western Massachusetts. In the State House level as well. I've been my class was a very large class when I came in 2015, and we had some new Republicans in there, but we had like around 30 people in that class, and we all work together. We've become like, that's our freshman class, and we'll move forward together. So again, I think I've been very pleased in terms of the level of cooperation and collaboration that we have as legislators.
And are you able to work with the governor when you're needed to as well? He is a Republican.
So far, so good.
That's good to hear. All right, when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking about the 4 ballot questions in this year's election. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back. You're watching 22 News in Focus, and today we're talking about the results of Tuesday's election. Here with me now, Jose Tosado, State Representative for the 9th Hamden District, and Brian Ash, State Representative for the 2nd Hamden District. I want to talk about the 4 ballot questions. It surprised me how much voters really knew about the ballot questions. A lot of times when we are reporting and asking people what they think in years past, they're not really too well versed with them all. But this year, they really were. They were important. Let's talk about question 1, the slots parlor question. It didn't really affect us here in Western Massachusetts, right? That wouldn't have.
That's correct. It's pretty much it was being proposed in Revere, I believe, in the eastern part of the state. So it doesn't affect us that much, and obviously the question failed. I don't think it was a referendum on casino gambling, because casino gambling has passed. There was actually, I think it was in 2014, there was a recall effort on the whole casino question, which failed 60 to 40. So, I mean, Massachusetts residents want casinos. They just didn't think that this changing the rules at this point and bringing in a second slots parlor was the right thing to do.
And I think it was an overstretch that we have one casino up and running. We don't even have, like in Springfield, we haven't got our casino going, and we're already looking for another one. I think people were like, let's get what we have first, see how we're going before you even think about something like that.
In your jobs, how do you deal with the ballot questions at the State House? How does that whole process work to get the ballot question on the ballot? Do you have a role in that at all?
Well, people have a big role in that. Whatever group is behind it, they can go out and get signatures, petitions to get it moving. And obviously, as legislators, we follow it, and whether it's going to be binding or non-binding, if it's something we're going to have to vote on later, or if it's going to be the will of the people, which these questions are.
Exactly. They're originated by the citizens, and again, if you get a number of ballots and the Secretary of State certifies that, then the question will get on the ballot. If it went through the legislature, it would be more in regards to legislation than an actual ballot question.
And have you had similar legislation about slots parlors and that concern that maybe you voted on in the past?
Not in my long tenure.
No, I mean, we just had the original casino.
Right.
Well, but other than that, no. And we look at them as voters as well, because not only are we legislators, but we also vote in our district. And these are things that impact, our families, our personal lives. So we look at them individually as well as legislators.
Question 2 was a big one, charter schools.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of commercials about that, a lot of people going door to door. Governor Baker was really vocal in support of expanding charter schools. What were your thoughts on the election results on that question?
Well, first of all, I really didn't see any surprises there. I mean,
No.
people did a good job in terms of doing polls on all the questions. And I think the good part about it is that people were able to make an educated decision,
Right.
because I think both sides, whether you were for it, lifting the cap or against lifting the cap, people got the information that they needed because the supporters and the opponents did a good job in informing the public.
And I think, look at the charter schools, I think people are concerned, say, we have public schools, instead of keep watering it down with more charter schools, let's fix what we have. Let's make sure our public schools are working better.
So do you predict that in the start of the next session, something will come of this? This was a message, like you said, to you guys that there's something possibly wrong with the way that our schools are working. People want change in that. And though it didn't pass, it's obviously an issue that affects a lot of people. Will you guys be...
Well, yeah, like any of these questions, they're always sending a message, and that's where we get our cues from, the general public. If they're telling us, they really want something, of course we're looking at it. And it's not something that's brand new. That's something that,
Right.
The Department of Education, the legislature, as well as local communities, cities, and towns are continuously working on.
Exactly. People want more choices in how their kids get educated, and they want a good quality education. I mean, who doesn't want that? What parent doesn't want that? Clearly, we have our challenges, particularly in the inner cities, as in regards to public schools and the number of underperforming schools. However, there's reasons for that, and also we can't afford to keep taking money out of public education and putting it elsewhere, because that's not going to solve the problems. It's going to make it worse. So I think the message loud and clear from the public is, Houston, we have a problem here that we need to address it. So I think we need to start working on that. Maybe having a more equitable reimbursement formula for public schools. I mean, things we certainly need to take a look at.
Okay, question 3, the animal question. That passed with ease. It seems like we didn't really hear a lot about that question, keeping animals, chickens and cows and pigs in such confinement that they couldn't move around. That's now banned.
Right.
Did you hear any feedback from that?
I mean, I did, and when we were at the State House, we heard feedback. To me, that was a no-brainer. I mean, obviously they raise the animals that we eat, but if we can't be humane in the treatment of how we treat these animals, I mean, I think that's saying something about society, and I wasn't surprised at the result of that, and I'm sure Jose wasn't surprised either. Question
4, probably the biggest one because it passed. Recreational marijuana use is now going to be legal in December in Massachusetts. But I think the big concern that I've heard from a lot of people is how it's really going to be regulated. And when people are on the roads, the drinking and driving thing, what's going to be regulated there with drinking and using marijuana?
Right. Go ahead. Yeah. Well, first of all, given that it has passed, it will go into effect come December 15th. I believe it will no longer be criminalized. I think the House leadership, and particularly the speakers specifically, has said that we need to get to work in terms of developing safeguards, developing legislation that's going to address issues of public safety. And I think that's probably going to be a big issue on our agenda moving forward into January.
Absolutely. That was my biggest concern with the question as well, is the public safety aspects. And especially when you talk about the edibles part of it, you have children, you don't want them getting mixed up, taking candy, somebody overdosing on that. There's a lot of things that we have to go through now, and the will of the people, they've spoken, they've said what they want, but now we just have to make sure there's safeguards in place, that it is still as safe as possible for everybody in society.
Is this something that you think will benefit Massachusetts when it comes to taxes, the amount of money that it might bring in?
Well, taxes, yes, but as long as we're, not burdening the taxpayers too much with this, and as long as the health risks aren't too great. But, I mean, I'm sure there will be, a a bigger tax windfall from that, but we'll see how much it actually impacts the Commonwealth.
We'll have to wait and see. My understanding is that Colorado brought in $7.4 billion in new revenue because of the legalizing recreational use of marijuana. So we'll see. Also, as part of the things we're going to be looking at this legislative session is the current 12% tax rate that's being proposed to go along with the recreational marijuana. Is that sufficient? I mean, I believe there's a school of thought, and particularly in the leadership, that's really low. And if it passed or stayed that way, we will be one of the lowest of all the states that has recreational marijuana. We'll be one of the lowest once receiving that level of taxes. So again, something to take a look at. Will it bring additional revenue? Absolutely. But we need to take a look at other things that go beyond the dollar and more of the quality of life it's going to have on people.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for being here today. And when we come back after the break on 22 News in Focus, we'll be speaking to 2 of your state senators. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about this historic election year. Donald Trump is our new president come January, and Republicans have control over the House and Senate. You also voted on local elections and ballot questions here in Massachusetts. So joining me now are Eric Lesser, state senator for the 1st Hampden and Hampshire District, and Don Humison, state senator for the 2nd Hampden and Hampshire District. Welcome to the program, and congratulations to both of you.
Thank you very much
for winning re-election.
We're very happy to be here.
And a relief, I'm sure, just like the state representative
We're
said.
glad it's
Yeah,
over.
of course.
All right, so first let's talk about the presidential race. What did you guys think? You're a Republican, you're a Democrat.
You want to go first,
Sure,
Don?
let's start. Very contentious from the beginning. I think what I heard a lot, and maybe Eric's heard the same thing, as we were out on our campaign trails in our own district, I heard from a lot of people how tired they were of politics. They just it felt like this election for president has been going on for 2 years. And I think people, one way or another, were looking forward to it being over. That's what I heard the most from people saying, I'll just be glad when the commercials are off the television and all the debates are done and we can just get back to sort of a normal existence, regardless of what happens. Now, I think that was one thing. I think it was probably a surprise, the outcome. I'm not sure, and I'll tell you as a Republican, I'm not sure I thought Donald Trump would get elected. I think that speaks to some things in our country that we have to really face now, and I certainly wish him well as our president. I think we all want whoever is the president of the United States to do well, because that means our country does well. And now we have to come together. I thought the Donald speech was very good at 3 o'clock in the morning. I happened to be up after my polls got finished and my election was over. I watched everything on television and listened to it on the radio, and I was, I guess, happy with the way he started. I'm happy this morning with hearing or actually, I'm sorry, hearing this week when Hillary Clinton spoke about how she spoke too. So I think that's a good way to start the new process of healing the nation and beginning the whole the new administration.
So, obviously disappointed in the result, was not supporting Donald Trump, but he is the president-elect now, and having been part of a presidential transition for President Obama from President Bush, he deserves and he's earned the chance to show his ability to unify the country after what Don said is a very divided election. I think that the point here, though, to zoom out is we live in a very combustible time in our politics and our economics. A lot of that is driven by big forces that no one controls, whether it's technology, the changes in our economy. And that's an unsettling feeling. We see it every day when we're out talking to people, when we're out in our communities, and people feel unsure about their futures and about where they fit in an economic and a technological system that's in constant change. When you see changes like this in our politics and in our broader society, it creates uncertainty in our politics. And I think that's why this win came without any of the pollsters or any of the pundits predicting it. The challenge now is, now that he is the president-elect and will be the president, is that change that he represents going to be directed towards a cause of unity and towards bringing people together around the issues that he talked about? Or is it gonna continue to be a fulcrum for division? And a lot rests on that. and a lot rests on how the next few weeks unfold and how that story unfolds. As an American and as a citizen of our country and as a person who cares deeply about our institutions and our system, I'm hopeful that he will work to heal divisions and to unify our country. But frankly, that's not how the campaign went, and that's not how the tone of the campaign went. So there's quite a lot of work to do. We owe him the space and the ability to make that case and to show that. But there's a lot left to see in the coming weeks. But I think what's important for people to appreciate and to understand is that there's a lot of underlying frustrations and uncertainty out there about how our kids are going to live as fulfilling a life and fulfilling opportunities as we did. How our families are going to continue to grow and prosper in a changing world and in a changing economy. And that was what was underlying, these changes we saw, and we owe it to everyone who participated in this election and to people who didn't participate in this election to make sure that we are working in government to address those concerns.
I think Eric's right when he talks about the uncertainty. We have a great country and something that I believe is the envy of the world, in that every 4 years or every 8 years we transition power peacefully from one administration to another, maybe from one party to another, and certainly from one candidacy or candidate to another. We saw this week just how the markets reacted to that uncertainty. They hate the markets, hate change, and they hate uncertainty, and they want stability. And for a little while this week, it was pretty rocky. I think it's improving now, but that's an example of that uncertainty in our country. But I think the election of Donald Trump also shows that there was something else going on. I think there was a great dissatisfaction on the part of at least the people who voted for Donald Trump to become president in the way the establishment of government was. The Democrats and Republicans establishment in Washington just wasn't doing it for this group of people that put Trump into power. And now, he's right. Eric's absolutely right. The campaign for many of us was tough to watch. It was not the way that I think either one of us run our campaign, certainly not our styles. But we have to see now what President-elect Trump does, how conciliatory he is, and as I said, I think he began well, and then what he puts together as a cabinet, and how he articulates a vision that all of us, whether it's a state like Massachusetts that didn't go for Trump or states that did, how all of us as part of the country are going to act and react over the next 4 years.
Yeah, this is such a big issue, and it's such a historic moment. I think it's worth us discussing it. Don's absolutely right. Don's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. What we try to do every single day is talk about issues and substance and the actual working of government, whether it's the work we did collaboratively on substance abuse, the work we did collaboratively on the soldiers' home.
Proof that it can be done.
And our veterans.
Right.
Exactly, proof that it can be done. But we should just caution that there is a path to providing optimism and to providing a sense of belonging to our institutions and government for, in particular, a lot of rural folks and working class white Americans who gravitated to the Trump campaign. I mean, Robert F. Kennedy, Franklin Roosevelt, these were candidates that attracted similar coalitions and built very hopeful, optimistic, and inclusive messages around those coalitions. And I think the challenge now is, will our new president-elect be able to rise to that occasion? I'm hoping and praying that he will, but I think that there's quite a lot left undone, and that's going to have to play out in the next weeks and months.
Very interesting. We'll be talking about statewide questions, the 4 ballot questions, when we come back. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Watching 22 News in Focus, and today we've been discussing the results of Tuesday's election with Eric Lesser, state senator from the 1st Hampden and Hampshire district, and Don Humison, state senator for the 2nd Hampden and Hampshire district. I do want to talk about the ballot questions. First, though, what's the makeup like now of the state Senate after this election? Has anything really big changed?
We kept the 6 Republican incumbent senators remained. There was some thought that we might be able to pick up a couple of the seats, but that didn't happen. And I think we have some new Democratic members on the Senate side.
Yeah, one exciting thing is I've led for the past term an initiative around millennial engagement in politics, in particular getting younger folks and younger people involved in the process and running themselves. We have two new young senators who are going to be joining. Adam Hines from the Berkshires, our neighbor here in Western Massachusetts, and on the other end of the state, representing Cape Cod, is Julian Sear, who was just elected, who I believe is 30 or 29, somewhere in that age range. So we'll have some young faces, and I think that's good. I think that's important because I think, if anything, what this presidential election showed is I think we're in desperate need for some younger, newer perspectives in the political process. So that'll be something exciting to work on and look forward to.
It's almost the best of both worlds because we get a little bit of new blood, but not so much that the process gets overturned. I heard you talking with our friends in the House of Representatives earlier, and it's nice to have some consistency going from term to term because our terms are only 2 years long. If there were longer terms, perhaps maybe it'd be better to have turnover, but if you have too much turnover, you have to start literally from scratch at the beginning of every session. Right. So now we'll be able to roughly pick up where we left off, bring the new senators in and get them sworn in on the first day of session, get them assigned to committees and things like that, and then pretty much pick up where we left off at the end of last session.
And what are some of the big topics that you'll both be, I know you campaigned on, but also that you'll be talking about once you head back?
I think some of the topics that we talk about are eternal. They're the things that are always important to us as legislators from Western Massachusetts, things like infrastructure, things like jobs and the economy here in Western Massachusetts versus the economy in Boston within the 128 belt and how well it's doing there and how sometimes we have challenges here 100 miles west of the capital. Those things we will always have to look at. And of course, infrastructure now with all the work going on the turnpike and the new tolling gantries and things like that, that starts to get people thinking about other infrastructure improvements that we need to make here.
Like East-West Rail.
That's another one. Would you like to talk about that?
Well, we'll let
We've
you know.
never heard you talk about that.
Let's speak about that. But that is definitely one of them and an important piece to the future of the Commonwealth's traveling or transportation infrastructure. It really is.
Yeah, I think actually you're going to find a lot of agreement between Don and I on some of the key issues that need to be worked on. I think the overarching sort of prism that I think we both approach our jobs from is, the economy overall in Massachusetts is actually doing pretty well. Our unemployment rate is much lower than the national average. Our growth rates are much faster than the national average, but we don't feel that in Western Mass, and we don't feel included in that. So, number one on our agenda as a Western Mass delegation really is better stitching ourselves into that growth and opportunity so that a kid in Westfield or a family in Springfield or in Chicopee or in Northampton or in the Berkshires or wherever in our communities in Western Mass feels just as much included in that Massachusetts story as a family in the eastern part of the state. So specifics that make that a reality. Well, I do think east-west, high-speed east-west rail service has to be at one of the top items, and that's going to be something I'm going to file when I get back in, when we get back in January. Continued work on the substance abuse crisis and the opioid addiction crisis is going to be at the very top of our agenda, and work around manufacturing. Both Don and I represent real manufacturing centers in Westfield, in my communities in Springfield, in Chicopee, in Ludlow, and East Longmeadow. We have a lot of manufacturers, a lot of good middle-class jobs. You heard so many buzzwords on this presidential campaign about how you create middle-class opportunity, how you create jobs for people that actually sustain lifestyles and allow you to build a home and build a future. Well, we have great examples in Western Mass.
Real high-tech jobs right here.
We need more voc ed training. We need to close the skills gap. We need better investments in our community colleges and on our local workforce to make those jobs a reality and to keep them.
The jobs are actually there. We need now the people to fill the jobs. We have our manufacturers telling us all the time that it's hard to find people that are qualified to do the work or interested in doing the work that they have to do. And there are plenty of shops in our districts that are looking for employees, but they need to be employees who are, if not already trained, at least amenable to being trained in that skill.
Right.
So talking about agenda, you guys both kind of ran on these ideals and what you do every day at the State House. I have a question for you, Senator Lesser. We saw that President Obama endorsed you. Of course, you worked for him, but is that alluding to maybe future political ambitions?
Oh, I don't know about that. I was just got reelected, so we've got a lot in front of us. I've got a new baby coming in January.
Congratulations.
So I have a lot on my plates. But I did work for President Obama. I got he's a mentor to me. I worked on his campaign starting in 2007, back when he was, I remember, 25 points behind in the polls. So I've always been suspicious of polls, but he was
especially this time around.
Right, 25 points back in the polls when I first worked for him. I worked for him for his first 2 years in the White House, and I do think even just seeing him this week and how he's handled and responded to to this election. People can have their disagreements with President Obama, and certainly there's a robust debate about his presidency and about the decisions he's made, but he's always conducted himself, I believe, with a lot of class, and so is his family. And that's a great lesson for me, and that's something I've always strived for in my own work in the Senate and my own work with my constituents. And I was really grateful that he lended his support, and grateful that he's going out on a high note.
All right.
Eric's next job will be changing diapers.
Exactly.
That's your next job.
Ballot questions really quickly. We don't have a lot of time, so we're going to probably just talk about question 2 and 4, since
Sure.
those are the two that really were the talking points this year. Question 2, charter schools. What are your thoughts on that, the fact that it didn't pass?
The Senate spent a lot of time as a body. We literally had, over 3 caucuses, joint caucuses with Republicans and Democrats, where we really tried to tackle the issue of charter schools and whether there should be charter school expansion. We, in the end, weren't able to get there, so we let it go to the ballot. I don't think I was surprised at all by the outcome of either 2 or 4. But I heard our rep friends say this, and I think Eric will agree. Regardless of what happened in the questions at the ballot last week, we, as a legislative body, will continue to have to deal with educating all of our children in our schools or in our districts across the state. And that's going to be something that we continue to face in the Senate and the House.
Yeah, I think question 2 was loud and clear. People want investment in their public school system, and they want an education plan, and they want education policy that helps all our kids. And I think that was the message, loud and clear. Question 4 on marijuana, also loud and clear. I think there's a lot of frustration with how unfairly marijuana laws are prosecuted, the criminal justice implications that has, the disparities in treatment of that, I think fueled a lot of the feelings towards legalization, and the belief that maybe it's time to bring this system out into the sunshine, so to speak, and tax it, get the revenue, and apply that revenue to other areas. We're going to be busy with this because there's a lot of unfinished elements that we're going to have to handle in the legislature.
The actual details of regulating it.
Exactly.
I don't have such a sunny outlook on question 4. I was against it, and I thought, it sent a bad signal at a time when we were dealing with the opioid crisis here in Massachusetts to then say, well, don't do opiates, but it's okay to smoke pot or take edibles. I think there's some hypocrisy there, but I think the bigger issue is when we sent a delegation of senators out to Colorado to look at the actual realistic impact on a question like this passing in a state, they all came back with serious concerns about the practical, boots on the ground type of problems that we're going to face. And we're going to have to deal with that as a state government, and of course our constituents will have to deal with that in their cities and towns.
All right, we'll look forward to what you guys do when your new session begins. Yes,
Thank you
we
very
are.
much.
Thank you so much for being here.
Great to
We
be here.
appreciate it. You're watching 22 News in Focus. We'll have the last word when we come back. You've been watching 22 News in Focus. Today we discuss the results of Tuesday's election, from the presidential election to Massachusetts ballot questions and local races, and what it all means for the residents of Massachusetts. That's our program for today, and we want to thank all of our guests for joining us, and thanks to you at home for watching. If you missed any of it, you can watch it in full on our website at any time at wwlp.com. And from all of us here at 22 News, we wish you a wonderful Sunday.